Well, hello and a very warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn, and a regular guest here on the show. Delighted to welcome back Ben Habib. How are we doing, Ben?
I'm very well indeed. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me on. Good to see you again. I must apologize to you and your viewers for not being suitably besuited as you are. Normally I would be, but it is Sunday when we're doing this show, and I just thought, well, can't be bothered to put a tie on, so
I,
forgive me.
I, I think that's okay. What I do notice, because it's a Sunday, that the drinks cabinet behind you seems to get lower and lower each time.
I tell you what does get low is the bottle of cognac,
Oh,
because
that's
that's
good.
my, yeah,
We
that's
should
my
do this in
favorite.
person. I think in real life would be good.
That's my
Well,
favorite sort of calming drink. Just a very, just slow sipping. I don't know. But you didn't have me on to talk about my cognac
oh
habits,
no,
yeah.
I do. I think I could sample it with you. We could do a tasting thing. I love that. And there's a lot to drive people to drink in the press today. Not least
There is.
calls for the resignation for the Chancellor for these lies about the fiscal narrative and so on and so forth. So more black holes than Stephen Hawking is what we were told about. And she talked about black holes, and the OBR said there was no black hole. In fact, there was a surplus. What's your take on that, Ben?
Well, she clearly wants to tee herself up. She was seeking to tee herself up to deliver her ideological budget. And it's actually, frankly, a miracle that the OBR would have given her anything other than a fearful forecast of the future, almost irrespective of what she did. The country is facing real economic challenges. There may be no particular black hole that's opened up in the last few months, but we mustn't forget that the country's got a debt level than it's ever higher than it's ever had since World War II. It's got a taxation take that's higher than it ever was, since World War II. And at some point, the British people and the markets will be unable to support the insatiable desire of the government to take our money. And the markets will go on strike, and the British people will simply just collapse under the weight of taxation. And you have an imploding economy. That's literally what we are facing. So, it's amusing to me, just from a purely intellectual, on an intellectual basis, that they can have a debate about black hole. There's one massive gaping hole in our finances, which is a national debt that's pretty much 100% of gross domestic product, and that should be the wake up call. Andrew, every year we spend about 100 billion just in interest payments on the national debt. And our deficit every year, we're running at about 150 billion. In other words, our entire deficit that the government is borrowing, because that's how they fill their deficit, they're borrowing just to pay interest. And in any family, we know that if you're borrowing money to pay the interest on your Visa card bill or whatever it is, you are about to go under. You can't survive like that. And that's where the country is. Um, and on the budget, just very briefly on the budget, leave aside what she did for a second. The OBR said, as a result of her budget, growth would be down, productivity would be down, national debt would go even further up by 2030, that the tax take as a proportion of GDP would go on up again. So by the OBR's own assessment, this was a bad budget. She would have been better off doing nothing if she wanted the books to be better balanced. And yet there she is, giving more money away to people who can't afford to have children, um, damning those who worked hard, saved, taxing those who have got bigger salaries because they've either had inflationary increases in their salaries or because they've actually worked harder, condemning those who wish to save in their pension schemes. You know, all of what she's doing is deeply damaging to the economy of this country, black hole or not. Where we got one massive black hole.
Yeah, but I think that the point about the black hole, of course, is that people are saying that they were misled and she misled Parliament. She called this emergency press conference to talk about the black hole and how bad it is. Yet, merely days beforehand, at the end of October, she was told that specific black hole, not talking about what you're talking about the debt, but black hole for the other purposes. She was told quite specifically there is no such black hole. Has she misled
Yeah.
Parliament and should she resign?
Oh, she's been misleading Parliament, and Keir Starmer has as well. Ever since they got to office, they first said the Tories left a £22 billion black hole, which was a complete nonsense, a fabrication in their own minds. And she's done it again. But they lie repeatedly. This is the norm. They seem to have money to spend on illegal migrants. They have money to pay foreigners, 1.5 million foreigners on universal credit. They can find the money required to provide the NHS with provide the money to the NHS to treat foreigners for free. We can spend money on the Ukrainian war, seemingly without blinking an eye. We can give millions away to foreign net zero, hundreds of millions away to foreign net zero projects. All this kind of absolute largesse, splashing the British taxpayers' money against a wall for no return. And yet they go on about a black hole. These people are in contempt of the United Kingdom. They're in contempt of their duty, of their fiduciary duty to the British people.
Well, they also, I mean, we always go back to the manifesto. It rings in the ears. And I was watching her on the Laura Kunzberg show this morning, wriggling, if you like, about the manifesto saying we will not increase taxes on ordinary people. Well, we're talking about the rates of taxes. Well, those have gone up if you look at the different side, because obviously 2% is now on dividends and interest and so on and so forth. She talks about everybody having to contribute more, including the ordinary working person, whoever that might be. She lied about that as well, didn't she?
It did. Well, the manifesto pledge was that they wouldn't increase income tax. And freezing the thresholds is an increase in income tax because your wages, if you don't get a wage rise, you're getting poorer. If you do get a wage rise, you pay higher taxes. So she is lying. And income tax, by the way, if you happen to be well off enough to own a rental property rental income, that tax has gone up from 20% to 22%, the basic rate, and 40% to 42%, and so on. They've raised taxes across the board. But what are they going? The point, Andrew, is if they were raising these taxes, there's no, there should be a reason for it. There should be a purpose which will right the ship. There's no purpose. They are literally borrowing money, taxing us more, just so they can pay interest bills. We're not going to right this ship in that way. We have to cut expenditure. It's not austerity. It's a matter of good housekeeping. We have to cut expenditure and we have to take the weight of the British state's knee off the neck of the British working and middle classes. And it is also the middle classes. We mustn't forget them. Of course, the working class need to have a leg up, but there's the middle classes who drive the economy. The working and middle classes collectively drive the economy, and they must get tax breaks because there is no real incentive at the moment to be working.
Yeah, and that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, that's the headline in the Sunday Express today. It says families need wages of £71,000 to beat benefits. Where's the incentive?
Yeah, absolutely. Benefits becomes an entirely legitimate career choice. It's no longer, for those on hardship. It becomes something that is frankly a better option than working. And it's no accident, therefore, that we've now got 8 million people in this country on universal credit, 4 million of whom are not even looking for a job. There are 35 million people, roughly, the working population of the United Kingdom. 4 million of them are getting benefits from the government and not even looking for a job, claiming that they've got physical disability, mental health issues, whatever it is. And no doubt there are some genuine complainants in there, but it can't be right that there are 4 million people in this country getting benefits and not even looking for a job. It can't be right.
No,
Britain literally is not working.
no, you have to absolutely incentivize people to work. And if you sit at home breeding, bonking for Britain when you can't afford it, there is no incentive. Going back to some of your posts, on November the 25th, your post on X, you warned Rachel Reeves' budget would push the UK into full-on financial crisis. Now you've heard it. Do you stand by that?
I do. I absolutely stand by it. And if the OBR is saying national debt's going to go up by a marginal amount, they say from 95% of GDP to 96% of the GDP by 2030. You can bet your bottom dollar that the outcome's going to be a hell of a lot worse than the OBR is predicting. And we won't be able to sustain it. There's going to be that Minsky moment. I think you and I have discussed this on your show before. There'll be a Minsky moment when the markets suddenly go, right, we've had enough, we're not buying British government debt. And then all hell will break loose because interest rates will go through the roof as the government seeks to attract capital. That'll absolutely kill the economy. And then you import inflation as the pound collapses, and you're in a cycle out of which you can't emerge. And the IMF won't be able to bail us out. I used to think maybe an IMF bailout would precipitate an election and we can have a change of direction. Actually, I don't think the IMF's got enough capital to bail the British government out. We would just it would be like a train that's heading rapidly into the buffers, and there's no ability to pull a brake. No ability. We're just going to hit those buffers.
Yeah. You called it Mugabe economics. What specific Zimbabwe style elements do you see rewarding non-workers over pensioners and employees? And how, and I know this is something we often talk about, you may not be ready to answer yet, but how would Advance UK immediately reverse this without triggering the short-term pain you previously warned about?
So it is Mugabe economics. Mugabe robbed the rich, literally robbed the rich to spread money amongst his supporters. And that's what Rachel Reeves is doing. She may be doing it in a more sophisticated way, but that's precisely what she's doing. And she's not taking the steps required to grow the economy, to take the burden of this over bloated state off the neck, as I say, of the British working and middle classes. She's got to do that. We need an economic liberation. And that is what Advance UK would do. And look, one of the first things Margaret Thatcher did, Margaret Thatcher inherited an economy that was in really, really bad shape. High inflation, high unemployment, coming in, at a time, I think the winter of discontent actually came in the first year of her government. But things were really bad. Public services weren't working. Rubbish was piling up outside people's homes. I remember it vividly because it was my first year. I'd just come from Pakistan as a young boy to boarding school. And I remember that first year. But the first thing Margaret Thatcher did, because she recognized that Britain has to get working, was to cut taxes. People forget this. In her first budget, she cut the higher rate of tax or income tax, and she cut the basic rate of income tax as well. She knew she had to get people back into the workplace. And you can couple that, Andrew, very easily with saving money that is absolutely teed up to be saved. As I say, strip all foreigners of benefits. Make sure that foreigners don't get free treatment on the NHS. Make sure that illegal migrants are not housed in hotels and given free medical care, dental care, cash in their pockets, and so on. Just between those three things, there's 20 to 25 billion pounds per annum of saving. You can definitely afford a tax break. But in addition to that, you've got to be, I'm afraid there's got to be tough love for those 4 million people who are not working. They've got to be told, get a job within a year or your universal credit is going, unless there's some exceptional circumstance. And and they've got to be forced back into the job market. We've
And,
got to
and,
cut
and what
welfare.
would you call those exceptional circumstances?
I mean, you would have to prove that you are absolutely incapable of leaving your home to go into the workplace. That's what you would have to prove. And I do not accept that there are 4 million people in this country, that large a number, incapable of doing that. What we've got actually is a benefits culture, which is also being promoted by the individuals who are responsible for handing out those benefits. There's a real, it's almost as if those sitting behind the desk handing out benefits are acting as an advisory service and explaining to people how they can maximize. I get lots of anecdotal stories about how people are being advised, do this, do that, you can get a higher payment, don't put this on your form, put something else on your form. What the hell? They should be minimizing the expenditure rather than trying to promote it. Personal independence payments and all that kind of thing, mobility cars. I think, did I read correctly that the most electric cars are sold actually through the PIP system, that the electric car market would collapse if it wasn't for government largesse? This is all wrong. This is
Yeah, no,
Mugabe economics.
I know, absolutely, and you need to look at that sort of side. And they talk about infrastructure and so on and so forth. The reality is where this money goes, because as you rightly point out, most of it's going to be going on paying off the debt. And those electric cars we speak about, they're actually a bit heavier than your normal cars, so they probably have more impact on the roads anyway. The interesting thing is, as you rightly point out, it's punishing people who work, earn, and save, and disincentivizing those who are not currently working from they can sit at home and breed, basically. Now that's got to be wrong. Polls are divided, obviously. However, Rachel Reeves points that she's going to be bringing lots of children out of poverty. Now, obviously, that is key. What would you do in those circumstances?
But that's a lie, isn't it, Andrew? That's another lie. The payment doesn't go to the children. The payment goes to irresponsible parents who've had children that they can't afford to have. And as much as I recognize the imperative that British people need to start procreating, and we need growth in our population from growth in our population from those who are already in the United Kingdom, not through immigration. As much as I recognize that, you don't do it by splashing largesse all over the unemployed. And if anyone thinks the money is going to go seamlessly from the government to the parents and for the benefit of the children that they're having, they're wrong. There will be people who will have children simply because they're going to get 3 grand a year off the state. They'll have 4 or 5 children, and they will treat those children appallingly. The idea that the children are somehow going to be saved is absolute garbage. It'll be the parents that will be profiting, frankly, at the expense of a number of parents who will be profiting at the expense of their children. This is not going to bring children out of poverty. It's not like there are a bunch of children who are in poverty, and if you suddenly make this payment, they're all going to be on their feet and prosperous and looked after with a proper 3 meals a day, roof over their head, and good education. That's not going to happen. What they're going to do is inculcate bad behavior, more procreation from people who shouldn't and can't afford to have children. As I've said, I think on this show before, if you're going to encourage people to have children, which we should, it needs to be done through the tax system. So it's those people who are working that get the break, not those who are on benefits. And this is where reform is wrong. Reform wants to remove the cap on two-child benefits. On the one hand, reform recognizes that the state is too big and the state borrowing is too large, taxation is too high, and then it splashes welfare. You know, it's just not joined up thinking.
So I don't know if you're ready. Every time we ask this, you're obviously you got your various people, you've got your college forming sort of policy. What would Advance do differently?
On what? The economy?
Yes.
Yeah, so the economy is, well, the first thing to say about the economy is that the economy serves the constitution, the culture, and the people of this country. The economy cannot be promoted over and above and to the detriment of those three things: constitution, culture, and people. And we've made a mistake. Successive governments have made a mistake of taking our constitution, our culture, and our people for granted and promoted the economy above them, which is why we've been able to accept the narrative that we must have mass immigration because it fills the jobs Brits are not prepared to do. And, you know, they're all just kind of units on a bit of paper. It's an accounting exercise. And no one's actually looked at the damage that's being done by bringing on mass immigrants who are largely unskilled. And from an economic perspective, that is absolutely daft because it's a Ponzi scheme, and we're beginning to see the effect of that Ponzi scheme. The NHS is overburdened, housing is overburdened, our education system is overburdened. But also, it damages the ability of the British people to work. It undermines wages, it keeps people poor, it uh, it then requires the government, because people aren't working and are poor, it requires the government to increase taxes and increase borrowing to pay out the benefits that are required to keep people from penury because they're not working. And mass immigration, therefore, takes you down in a cycle. So one of the priority for any incoming government has got to be to get immigration under control so that you allow wages to rise. So there will be some inflation, but people will be richer as a result of that inflation because wages will rise. And you take the neck of the knee off the neck of the working and middle classes by cutting their tax rates, by allowing tax thresholds to increase. And then you have to exercise tough love on those who are not working, force them back in. It's a bit of stick and it's a bit of carrot, force them back into the workplace. And if you do all of that, you will then suddenly find that very quickly, you will find that the burden of benefits on the government will reduce because you're not paying out as much. But also, those people then go into the workplace and start paying tax. So that Exchequer's income increases. So you have increased income into the exchequer, reduced expenditure by the exchequer, and then you start balancing the country's books. It's basic, it's obvious, and it can be done very easily. And then, of course, beyond that, Andrew, there's so much else that needs to be done. Deregulation. People underestimate how liberating deregulation would be, and that doesn't cost the exchequer anything. To get rid of net zero doesn't cost the exchequer anything. Let people drill for oil. Let our gas companies drill for gas in the North Sea. Take that energy, use it to reduce the cost of living on people in their homes. Use it to foster new British businesses, and so on and so forth. By the Treasury's own estimate, by the way, net zero costs the Treasury £50 billion a year. That was Philip Hammond's forecast in 2019. And if anything, they get these forecasts, they underrate these forecasts, so the burden's probably higher. So deregulate, cut working class taxes, cut middle class taxes, tough love on those people who are on welfare, and then do all the things that I've just discussed about foreigners on benefits, illegal migrants being paid ridiculous sums or having ridiculous sums of money spent on them, um, uh, and so on. On the back of an envelope, you can solve the problem.
Yeah.
This
One
idea
of
that
the
it can't is
one of the
insoluble
things,
is
in
wrong.
addition to axing net zero costs, and we've spoken about that beforehand, slashing immigration-linked benefits, you've spoken about obviously before. You retweeted a post from Nick Buckley on the 25th of November, talking about reforming the rogue civil service and judges. Talk to me about that.
So we got 500,000 odd people in the civil service now, and it goes up and up and up. And notwithstanding all the promises made by successive governments, um, they haven't cut back on it. I think in 1914 or something, you have to fact check, I'm going by memory. 1914, the Home Office had the civil service had 3,000 employees altogether. And that's when we had a blooming empire to administer. And we can't administer our country, our diminished country, with 500,000. You'll have to fact check the numbers, but it's of that order of magnitude. And it is just jobs for the boys. And so we've got to decimate the civil service. We've got to have the ability to decimate them. And one of the reasons they haven't been decimated is because the average parliamentarian hasn't got a clue about how to run a booze up in a brewery. They've got no real life experience. You need people who've actually run stuff to go in and do it. And I know people make it, there's a lot of chat about how the civil service will stand in the way of progress. They'll do this, they'll do that. Fine. I'm sure they do try to do that. I'm sure they do succeed to some extent. But no doubt in my mind, they are able to run their ministers ragged because their ministers are underwhelming, under par. They're not adequate for the job. And an advanced UK government, one of the things we're trying to do, and I think we're doing it reasonably successfully, is attract really capable people into the party, which is why we have our college. We've got over 20 people now in the college from all walks of life, some great academics who've got terrific experience in real life as well, who can bring their minds to bear on the problems that the country faces. And if and when we get into Parliament, we'll be able to form a government which will not be sidelined by nonsense from civil servants, because they will be able to challenge the civil servants. And if the civil servants won't give way, then they will have the confidence to sack those civil servants and either replace them or not replace them and get the job done. It requires that level of competency and self-confidence from ministers to drive a wedge through the civil service.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's all about efficiency and people embracing AI was one of the things I was delighted to at least hear to make increase efficiency in the NHS and elsewhere. I've always said I want to put the AI into Britain. As you know, I speak around the world as a futurist, back to the futurist about that sort of side. One of the things they have talked about, however, is the possibility of abolishing the jury system. What's your views on that?
It's utterly evil to abolish the jury system. I don't know if you've served on a jury, Andrew. Have you ever served?
I think
Um,
you're allowed to comment that I've served without going into details. Yes.
yeah. Oh, you can't go into details. I think I have told my story before. But anyway,
Well,
I've done jury
you can be
service.
arrested for contempt, not me. Go for it, Ben.
I mean, it was about 30 years ago or something, maybe more than 30. But I remember being called up to be on a jury and thinking, oh God, what a pain in the neck. And I served with people from all different walks of life again. I think there were 12 of us or something on the jury. And I remember thinking to myself, there's not a cat's chance in hell of this motley group of people coming to the right decision. How the hell are we going to get there? And and it was a remarkable eye opener of how democracy works, and in this case, in the judicial system, because over the course of the trial, my respect for the collective unit that was the jury went up and up and up. And in the end, the jury came up. I thought when we were doing our deliberations in the room, we had a guy, someone's appointed, one of the jurors is appointed from amongst the jurors to, lead direct the debate and so on. We absolutely nailed it. We got to the right answer. And and the right answer was not where my own mind was at the beginning of the trial either. I had been I had gone along and had an educational experience through the debate that had taken place behind closed doors with my fellow jurors. And it taught me that the jury system is a phenomenal system. It's a democratic system. It's our common law system. A jury can, for example, Andrew, it can recognize, yes, there is a law that deals with this matter, but we're not going to apply that law in this case. We're going to find the person either guilty or innocent anyway. And that is a remarkable thing because it's the British people making a decision in that particular case. And that is at the heart of our democracy, our common law system, the jury by trial, being judged by your peers, not by the authorities. And Lammy, to make the case that in the pursuit of efficiency, we're going to get rid of juries, would be doing deep, deep damage to our criminal justice system, which is already seriously damaged because of the creation of things like the Supreme Court, where you just have a bunch of judges who are not held in check by any particular system. At least in the past, when they were law lords, they were in Parliament and they had to make their arguments and give their expositions in front of their peers. And there was some kind of check on what they did what they did in the Lords. But they've got no checks now. It's behind closed door justice, a bunch of appointed individuals, many of whom, in my mind, are sort of far left extremist nutcases who don't really love this country. And yeah, so it would be awful to abolish the jury system. Absolutely awful.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously, judges will always say that they have to act in accordance with the laws. They can't make law. To your point about they can disregard or juries disregarding what the law says. Judges themselves make it very clear on several occasions they are confined to what the law says, which is why they have to look
Absolutely.
at that sort of side. You talk about getting rid of these sort of different Blair era bodies and so on and so forth. Who would you target first?
I mean, it's going to be a bonfire of regulations and laws, but there are a few that you can cite straight away: the Human Rights Act, the creation of the Supreme Court, the Equalities Act, the Climate Change Act, the Terrorism Act of 2000. And all the laws and regulations that hang off these. These acts of parliament are not singular and they don't end there. They then have progeny that come off the back of them, and you've got to basically unpick all of it. And then you've got to direct the courts to ignore all the precedents that may have been set in the last 30 years as a result of these laws having been in place. So there has to be a removal from our from our justice system of any idea that you can use a settled case that's post 1997 in order to guide a future judgment. I think, you'd need a blanket sort of statement that all precedents needs to predate 1996, 1997.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be looking at some of your more recent posts, including your post about your favorite poster boy for this sort of stuff, Nigel Farage.
Yeah.
Do not touch that dial.